My husband ditched my father's funeral to go on a trip with his mistress. But then, at 3 in the morning, I got a text from the father I thought was dead. It said, "I'm still alive. Come to the cemetery. Don't tell anyone." Today, I want to share the story of my life with you. It's a story that still gives me chills. Before my wedding, I honestly thought I was the luckiest woman alive. My fiancé, Jake Williams, and I had been together for 3 years. It was long enough for me to believe we were soulmates. Jake was sweet, thoughtful, and acted like I was the center of his universe. His mother, Brenda Harrison, made me feel so special when we first met. "My dear," she'd said, "you have a face that just lights up a room, and you're so well-spoken. I'm absolutely delighted by you." Hearing that made me feel like I was on cloud 9. I felt truly blessed. Hello, I'm Sarah. On this channel, I present to you the courageous, real-life stories of women. Please note, in all the stories you'll hear, names have been changed and visuals have been created to respect privacy. If you'd like to share your story and inspire other women, you can reach us through the channel's About section. I would be honored to be your voice. Now, I invite you to listen to the story of a woman who found the strength to stand tall, despite life's challenges. At the time, I told my father, Michael Lewis, the director, "Dad, I know I'll have a peaceful life when I marry Jake." My dad just gave me a kind smile. "If you're happy, I'm happy. But when you get married, try to be a little more selfish. Don't just silently put up with everything." I laughed, and though he was worrying too much. Jake had always been perfect around me, a total gentleman who always knew the right thing to say. After the wedding, I moved into my in-laws' house, which was a family tradition of theirs. The estate where Brenda lived was a huge, beautifully renovated mansion on a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Chicago that looked gorgeous from the outside. But strangely, a weird shiver went down my spine the first time I stepped inside. I told myself it was probably just nerves about starting a new life. But as they say, time reveals everything. After a few weeks of living there, I knew that shiver wasn't just my imagination. Brenda's attitude changed overnight. At first, she called me my dear. The next day, it was just daughter-in-law. A few days after that, the comments started, "Daughter-in-law, can't you get these dishes cleaner? Daughter-in-law, why does everything take you so long?" Her tone wasn't harsh, but her words were sharp as a knife. Anyone who's been in a similar situation knows what I'm talking about. Some words can hurt more than a slap in the face. My husband Jake turned into a completely different person from the man I'd fallen in love with. The texts asking if I'd eaten stopped. The loving looks disappeared. When he got home from work, he'd lock himself in his room and wouldn't come out. If I knocked on his door for dinner, his response was flat. Even on the days he ate out, he'd lie, "The meeting ran late." I knew he was lying, but I didn't say anything. A woman in love can be weak. I figured if my husband was working that hard, I could put up with these little things. I remember one night it was drizzling rain. I was rushing to dry some blankets for my mother-in-law because she got cold easily. When she saw me, she said, "I don't expect you to do everything, but this house has rules. A daughter-in-law should take the initiative and do things without being asked. Nobody likes lazy people." I clenched my jaw and forced a smile. "Yes, ma'am, I'll remember that." I felt a tightness in my chest. I worked a full day at my job, and the second I got off, I rushed home to make dinner. I was never lazy, but I didn't want to worry my parents, so I just endured it. My dad always told me that being too nice isn't always a good thing, but if I was okay, then that was all that mattered. I really believed that if I was just patient, my in-laws would eventually start to appreciate me. They say unity makes strength, but it felt like that unity was never going to happen, no matter how hard I tried. The distance between Jake and me grew more obvious every day. He always left his phone face down, and he'd lock it the second I walked into the room. One time I carefully asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" He snapped back, "Don't be ridiculous." From that day on, we were like strangers living in the same house, each trapped in our own world. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that things would get back to normal, but the situation only got worse. One day, when I was bringing some fruit to my mother-in-law's room, I heard her on the phone. She's so stupid because she's so nice. Who knows how long she'll even last in this house? Standing behind the door, it felt like my heart just stopped. It wasn't that I was sad she was talking badly about me, but it was the realization that all my hopes had been for nothing. Even after all these things, I thought they were just little tests. I was still young, hopeful, and I believed in the idea of family. I never could have imagined, not even in my wildest dreams, that this was all just the beginning of the tragedy that was coming. I had no idea a dark pit was opening up in front of me, ready to swallow my entire life and destroy my faith in marriage and in people. If I had known, I never would have kept going down that path. But I guess that's life. You can measure how deep a river is, but you can never know what's in a person's heart. And then, everything started to fall apart on a day I never saw coming. That morning, the sky was gray and overcast, like a bad omen. While I was making breakfast, the phone started ringing off the hook. It was Lucas, my father's driver for years. He was usually a really calm guy, but that day his voice was shaking. "Mrs. Lewis, please stay calm." The director. He had an accident. I froze. Everything went black. I didn't even hear the silverware crash to the floor. I kept asking questions, but my mind was a total blank, like it was stuffed with cotton. The only word echoing in my head was accident. Jake came out of his room, frowning because of all the noise. I managed to tell him through my sobs, "Honey, my dad had an accident." Without a single word of comfort, he just replied with ice in his voice, "Oh, well, we'll check on it later." My mother-in-law glanced at me like I was interrupting her breakfast and said, "A grown woman shouldn't be crying like that. Calm down. Your father is getting older." It was probably just his own carelessness. Her words felt like daggers in my chest, but I was in too much shock to even react. I rushed over to the estate in an Uber. By the time I got there, people were already coming and going, all with worried looks on their faces. Lucas hurried over to help me stand. According to the police, the director's car had crashed on a sharp curve near the ravine. The chauffeur is unconscious and the director. Oh, they couldn't find him in one piece. I collapsed right there on the floor. In that moment, I felt a pain so sharp it was like someone was physically crushing my heart. It's true what they say, losing a father is like having the main pillar of your house collapse. I felt like the ground had just disappeared from under my feet. That afternoon, Father Ian showed up. He was a priest who was very close to our family. He was wearing his dark robes and muttering prayers. He said he heard the news at the parish, got to the accident scene early, and recovered the ashes so my father's soul could rest in peace. My hands were shaking as I looked at the white urn on the altar. I never, ever imagined I would be seeing my father's remains in such a sudden and horrible way. The wake was filled with employees from my dad's company, business partners, and other acquaintances. The funeral was huge, just as you'd expect for a businessman of his stature. The smell of incense was everywhere, and the line of people waiting to offer their condolences was endless. But surrounded by all the flower wreaths and pitying looks, I felt so incredibly small and alone. I was freezing, a cold that went straight to my bones, like that urn had sucked all the warmth out of my body. I expected Jake to be there, to stand by my side and hold my hand, but he was a no-show all day. He didn't answer his phone, and he didn't reply to my texts. I tried to make excuses for him, telling myself he was probably stuck in an important meeting. Then I overheard some company employees whispering behind me. But what is Jake doing at a luxury resort, right in the middle of his father-in-law's funeral? Didn't you see the pictures? He looked pretty cozy with some young woman. I turned my head. On a cell phone screen, I saw a photo of Jake, grinning from ear to ear, with his arm around a young woman at a luxury resort. The post was from today, from the same time my father was being mourned. I felt a dull thud in my head. I grabbed a chair to keep from collapsing. I couldn't believe it. This man, the man I had loved so much and put all my faith in. I went back inside, trying to hide the burning humiliation I felt. My mother-in-law, seeing how pale I was, glanced at me and said, "Jake is a grown man. He has his own life. Don't make a scene at the funeral." Her words were like pouring salt on a wound. My lips trembled as I tried to smile. I just wanted to know where he is. My mother-in-law crossed her legs and calmly poured herself some tea. He's on vacation. He needed a break from the stress. He's been working very hard. Besides, you're handling the funeral just fine, aren't you? The night dragged on, and the guests started to leave. I sat by the altar, staring at my father's portrait and crying my eyes out. Father Ian kept walking in and out, reciting prayers, but his eyes kept darting to the envelopes of donations, like he was mentally counting the money. Around 3 in the morning, totally exhausted, I curled up on a sofa, shivering under a thin blanket. My tears weren't even dry when my cell phone vibrated. I reached out and picked it up. It was an unknown number. The message was just a few words. Chloe, it's Dad. I'm not dead. Come to the estate cemetery quietly. Don't tell anyone. A shiver ran down my spine. I stared at the screen, my eyes so wide the phone almost slipped out of my hand. I read each word again, my whole body trembling. It was definitely my dad's writing style, the way he spaced things, the way he addressed me. There was no doubt. A lump formed in my throat, and my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My father was alive. What would you choose to do in that situation? Tell me what you'd do. I shot up from the sofa like I'd gotten an electric shock. That short message just kept replaying in my head. Every letter was a blade twisting in my heart. How could my father not be dead? But a deep gut feeling told me it was really him. Anyone could try to copy his writing style, but not this perfectly, not his unique pauses, his punctuation, or the way he spaced his sentences. My hands shook so hard holding the phone that I had to grab the arm of the sofa to keep from falling. The house was dead silent, except for the whistling wind creeping through the cracks in the old wooden doors and the rhythmic click of Father Ian's rosary beads as he prayed by the altar. The thick smell of incense was making me nauseous, and my head was spinning. Calm down, I told myself. If Dad is really alive, that means someone wanted the whole world to think he was dead. And that means the crash wasn't just an accident. I swallowed hard and quietly stood up. The second my feet hit the floor, my mother-in-law cracked her bedroom door open. Her gaze was as sharp as a knife. "Daughter-in-law, what are you doing up at this hour?" I jumped and stammered, "Oh, ma'am, I just have a headache and wanted to get some fresh air." She looked me up and down, then said gruffly, "Don't wander around the house at night. You have to avoid bad omens during a wake." I lowered my head, but my heart was on fire. I went back to the sofa and pretended to lie down, waiting for her to close her door. When the sound of her slippers disappeared, I looked at my phone again. The message was still glowing on the dark screen. Holding my breath, I decided to contact the only person I could trust right now, my father's loyal assistant, Sebastian Allen. I sent him a quick text, asking him to meet me discreetly in the backyard right away. Not long after, Sebastian was there. He looked pale from being up all night. He looked at me with concern. "Mrs. Lewis, what's wrong? You called me so urgently, you scared me." I showed him the phone. When he read the message, his eyes went wide. "That's impossible. I don't have this number saved." "But that's definitely the director's writing style," I said in a quiet, shaky voice. "Sebastian, do you remember what you said last night?" The security camera at the cemetery was flickering. "Did you think someone messed with it?" Sebastian nodded quickly. "Yes, that's right. When we went to the estate to bring the offerings, the camera feed blinked, like something was covering the lens or someone stood right in front of it." I looked him straight in the eyes. "So, if my dad is alive, it means someone tried to kill him and wants everyone to think he's dead." Sebastian swallowed hard. "Mrs. Lewis, what are you planning to do?" I breathed out and said one word. "Go." We both quietly slipped out the back door. The moon was hidden by clouds, and the night was freezing. The estate cemetery, where they insisted on burying him, was just behind a small hill, only a few hundred yards from the house. But with the morning atmosphere, the path felt much creepier, with the sound of insects and the faint echo of prayers from the house. As we got closer to the cemetery, Sebastian grabbed my arm. "Mrs. Lewis, I just checked the recording again. There's a gap of exactly 1 minute where the screen goes black. It's right before you got the message." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart pounded. I looked around, but all I could hear was the rustling of leaves in the wind. The cemetery was mostly dark. The only light came from the faint, yellowish glow of a small lamp burning in front of a statue of the Virgin Mary. And then I saw it. The freshly dug grave with my father's name, Michael Lewis, carved into the headstone. My whole body trembled, and I felt a tightness in my chest. I walked closer and put my hand on the cold headstone. If my father was alive, then what was in that urn? And who told us it was him? Before I could even sort out my thoughts, I heard a crackling sound from the bushes behind me. I spun around, and Sebastian flicked on his flashlight. There, in the beam of light, a figure stumbled forward. His clothes were torn, and his face was covered in bruises and cuts. But his eyes were the same eyes I had known for over 20 years. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely working. I ran to him, feeling like my world was collapsing and being rebuilt all at once. I hugged him tight, my hot tears falling onto my hands. My father gasped, his voice hoarse, "Chloe, it's me. I'm still alive. Those monsters tried to kill me. Listen to me carefully." I cried silently, terrified someone would hear us. "Dad, what happened? Who did this to you?" He squeezed my hand and forced out every word with the last of his strength. "Jake and his mother. They're not who you think they are." I felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. I didn't fully grasp his words in that moment, but I had a gut feeling he was right. My in-laws hadn't just been cruel to me, they'd been cruel to my father. And everything I thought was a tragedy was just the beginning of what was to come. I stood there frozen in the middle of the cold cemetery. I was still holding on to my dad, afraid he'd disappear if I let go. Sebastian quickly took off his coat and wrapped it around him. My father leaned heavily against a tree, breathing hard. His body was a mess of scratches and bruises, with dried blood on some of the cuts. Seeing him so weak just broke my heart. "Dad, who did this to you? Tell me," I pleaded, my voice cracking. He closed his eyes and struggled to breathe in the ice-cold air. His voice was just a whisper, but every word burned into my heart like fire. "It wasn't an accident, sweetheart. It was a setup. They wanted to kill me." The night wind rustled through the bushes, and the leaves sounded like someone sobbing. Sebastian leaned in, worried. "Director, who was it? Please tell us everything so we can get you somewhere safe." My father opened his eyes and looked at both of us for a long moment before he spoke, each word landing like a heavy stone. "Jake and his mother. And Mr. Olson and Father Ian. They tried to hurt me." I felt like my head was going to explode. I shook it violently. "No, that can't be true. My mother-in-law and Jake wouldn't do that, Dad." My father raised a hand and put it on my head. His voice was deep, full of disappointment and pain. "Chloe, you're still too trusting. Brenda and Jake only care about themselves. I found out they were embezzling company funds and faking contracts. Before I could do anything about it, they made their move." He paused, breathing with difficulty. His voice sounded rough, like his throat was injured. "Mr. Olson came up with the plan to fake a car crash and send an unidentified body to be cremated. Father Ian was supposed to handle getting the ashes and managing the paperwork, so everyone would think I was dead." I bit my lips so hard I could taste blood, but I didn't feel it. Every word my father said was like a hammer blow, shattering the naive faith I had in my in-laws. "But how did you escape, Dad?" My voice was just a shaky whisper. Leaning against the tree, he slowly pieced together his memory. "Right before the car went off the edge, I knew something was wrong. I screamed at the driver to hit the brakes, but he was already drugged. The car lost control and skidded toward the edge. I was thrown out of the car at the moment of impact. I put a hand to my chest. Just picturing the scene made me feel weak. I was unconscious in the bushes at the bottom of the ravine. Luckily, a local who was out early setting bird traps found me and saw I was still breathing. He took me to a makeshift hut, gave me some water, and treated my wounds as best he could, but I couldn't tell him who I was. I was afraid they'd come back to finish the job." Sebastian gritted his teeth. "Director, they're even more evil than we thought. Where have you been hiding all this time?" My father looked around and whispered, as if he was afraid someone might hear. "In the woods behind the cemetery. I hid during the day and came out at night to watch. Tonight, when I saw the funeral at your house and my picture on the altar, I knew their plan had almost worked." I burst into tears. Dad, why didn't you let me know sooner? I thought you were really dead. He took my hand, his voice choked with emotion. I couldn't. You were in their house. I was afraid they would do something to you first. In his touch, I felt the bitterness of a father who had been completely betrayed, a man who had lived his whole life with integrity, helped countless people, and was ultimately stabbed in the back by the very people he had treated the best. Sebastian nodded firmly. Director, you can't stay here. I'll take you to an old warehouse we have behind the factory. No one will find you there. You'll be safe. My father looked at me, waiting for my response. I dried my tears and said, I'll take care of you, Dad. I'll protect you no matter what. In that moment, I realized I wasn't the submissive, patient daughter-in-law anymore. I had to face the truth. My in-laws weren't just cruel. They were people who had tried to murder my father, who wanted to steal my family's entire inheritance and power. I started walking, helping my father step by step through the thin fog. With every step, I promised myself I would never let anyone walk all over me again. We got my father to the safe hideout. While Sebastian cleaned his wounds, I watched them, a storm raging inside me. I knew my life was at a point of no return. A war I never thought I'd have to fight was waiting for me. A war against the very people who once called me family. When I helped my dad into the old warehouse behind the factory, a place where time seemed to have stopped, my heart was pounding. The walls were stained, and a single, weak yellow light flickered. Sebastian, my dad, and I all sat down for a moment to catch our breath. The smell of the antiseptic Sebastian was putting on my dad's wounds mixed with the cold air seeping through the cracks, creating a sharp smell. My dad took my hand and said in a hoarse voice, Chloe, you have to be extremely careful from now on. Go back to your in-laws' house and act like you don't know anything. Just like always. No one can suspect a thing. I nodded, but a fear I'd never felt before was growing inside me. Every breath, every look in that house now terrified me. Everything I had naively believed in was now a source of horror. Sebastian added, I'll bring medicine, food, and more blankets tomorrow. Director, you need to rest for a few days. Don't worry, Mrs. Lewis. I'll watch over him. My dad sighed and patted Sebastian on the shoulder. Sebastian, I'll never forget this. And you, Chloe. The only reason I'm still alive is because of you too. I silently put my hand on my dad's. My heart felt as heavy as a stone. I had never wanted the sun to rise so badly. I had to get back to my in-laws' house before anyone noticed I was gone. As dawn started to break, a fog covered the dirt road in front of the factory. I put on my coat and pulled my hat down low, covering half my face. As I slipped out the back door, my heart was beating like a drum. If my mother-in-law or anyone else found out I was out all night, everything would be ruined. I walked for a bit, then stopped, panting. The first silver light was appearing in the sky, and the neighborhood rooster started to crow. The cold air on my face helped me think more clearly. You have to act perfectly. No one, absolutely no one, can suspect you came back from the cemetery. When I crept silently back into the house, the wall clock said 5:15 in the morning. The kitchen was dark. The only sound was my mother-in-law lifting the lid off a pot. When she saw me, she froze. Her piercing eyes scanned me from head to toe, searching for anything out of place. Are you just getting in now? Her voice was sour like vinegar. I looked down and answered, yes, ma'am. I was in the backyard. I felt really sick last night and couldn't sleep. I went for a little walk, and I feel better now. She just grunted humph and went back to chopping onions. We're in mourning. If a neighbor sees you wandering around alone at night, they'll start gossiping. I lowered my head. I'm sorry, ma'am. As I apologized, I felt a stab of pain in my chest. What had I done wrong? I had lost my father. I had cried until my eyes were swollen. I had stayed up all night, and yet I still had to bow my head and stay quiet in this house. Just then, Jake came down the stairs. He was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, looking relaxed like he'd slept great. When he saw me, he frowned a little. What's wrong with you? Haven't you looked in the mirror? I gritted my teeth to stop myself from crying in front of him. I just didn't sleep well last night. Jake yawned. I was with a business partner last night and had too much to drink. I don't think I can attend the service today. You go and make excuses. I forced myself not to look at him. If I did, my anger would have made me collapse. A business partner. The woman he was with at a luxury resort was a business partner. But I had to pretend I knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. I answered, okay. My voice trembled as I said that single word. My mother-in-law immediately jumped in. Jake has a lot of work. There are plenty of people in the main hall. They'll be fine. Don't pressure your husband. Any other time, I would have choked on my own words, but that morning, instead of sadness, a feeling of betrayal that chilled me to the bone took over. Still, I pushed my feelings down. I had to make them believe I was weak, naive, and completely in the dark. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Brenda had no idea that in that moment, a silent war had started in my mind, a war they had dragged me into. During the funeral service that morning, I greeted the mourners. My eyes were swollen, but I didn't let my guard down for a second. Father Ian had shown up early, his rosary beads clicking as he recited prayers. His pitiful expression looked incredibly fake. He crept around the altar, collecting the donation envelopes like it was the most normal thing in the world. Seeing him gave me the chills. He had personally brought the fake ashes of my father into this house. He had lied to hundreds of people without even blinking. He was an accessory to attempted murder, and here he was, pretending to be a holy priest. The anger almost suffocated me. My father was hiding for his life, and the people who tried to kill him were standing right in front of me, acting so calm. I made a promise to myself, Chloe. From now on, you are not the good daughter-in-law anymore. You're going to make them afraid to even look you in the eye. But to do that, I first had to act extremely weak, naive, and harmless. Only when they let their guard down could I hit them where it hurt the most. This war was silent, but it was going to be fiercer than any other, and I had just taken my first step. My father's funeral service dragged on late into the night. The stream of visitors paying their respects never stopped. But the people who should have been there for me in my darkest moment were absent or cold. My husband Jake was hiding in his room, avoiding everyone, and my mother-in-law Brenda, even though she was there, was as cold as an iceberg. In the evening, I pretended to be exhausted and said I was going to my room to rest. My mother-in-law looked me up and down, then handed me a cold, damp cloth. Here, daughter-in-law, wash your face so the swelling goes down. If people see you like this, they'll think we're treating you badly in this house. Her voice was softer than usual, but her eyes were as sharp as a blade. I knew she was testing me. I bowed my head, took the cloth, and said quietly, "Yes, ma'am, thank you." Once I was in my room, I carefully shut the door. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst. I had been tense all day, playing the part of the fragile daughter-in-law. But I had to stay strong. My father was in hiding. I didn't know how far the people who wanted to hurt him would go. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath. Sebastian had texted me to let me know my dad was sleeping and his condition was stable. As long as he was safe, I could keep going. Just as I was about to lie down, I heard voices coming from my mother-in-law's room. They were talking quietly, but the old house's walls were thin, and I could hear every word clearly. "Are you sure she still doesn't suspect anything?" The voice that answered was Jake's. I froze. When did he get home? "She's too stupid to notice anything, Mom. She's way too busy crying at the funeral to figure anything out." My hands gripped the bedspread so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mother-in-law let out a contemptuous laugh. "If she was smart, do you think I would have ever accepted her as a daughter-in-law? Don't worry, this needs to be handled. It would be a real shame if this company didn't end up ours." I felt my blood boil. Not only had they tried to kill my father and abandon me when I needed them most, but they were talking about me like I was just some disposable tool. Jake continued, completely nonchalant, "But Mom, is the cremation certificate legit?" Then another voice joined in. A voice so familiar it made the hairs on my neck stand up. It was Father Ian. He whispered, "I took care of everything. The ashes were handed over according to regulations, so no one can check anything. There are plenty of unidentified bodies. You just have to find the right time for the cremation." I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Dad was right. It was him. He had swapped a stranger's ashes for my father's. My mother-in-law lowered her voice. Father, you've done a good job. When this is all over, we won't forget your help, but you have to be discreet. Father Ian let out a short laugh. With a parishioner as generous as you, do you really think I'd be foolish enough to mess things up? I felt my hands and feet go numb. This was a person my father had helped so much, and now, just for money and personal gain, he had sided with the people who tried to kill him. Jake lowered his voice. If Chloe finds out about this, we're finished. My mother-in-law shot back, and what is she going to find out? She's completely convinced the ashes the priest brought are real, more than she believes in herself. Let her cry for a few days. She'll get over it. Jake scoffed. You're right, Mom. If I'm just a little nicer to her, she'll believe anything I say. I bit my lips until they bled. All the affection and thoughtfulness from Jake over the past few years had been a complete lie, and my mother-in-law had only ever seen me as a servant who was easy to control. They had never once considered me family. Father Ian's voice came through again. But remember, the company isn't yours yet. If Mr. Lewis's old power of attorney documents show up, his daughter has the right to inherit. We have to get rid of this girl. My heart stopped. Get rid of me. My mother-in-law let out a dry laugh. Don't worry, Father. I can handle this daughter-in-law whenever I want. And if she doesn't cooperate, there are other ways. I couldn't listen anymore. My ears felt like they were stuffed with cotton, and an invisible hand was crushing my heart. I scrambled off the bed, backing away as if I was running from a monster. In the dark, I clamped my hand over my mouth to choke back the sobs that were about to explode out of me. They were going to take everything. To them, other people's lives were meaningless. I thought about my dad and shuddered. If I hadn't gone to the cemetery that night, if my dad hadn't sent me that message, he would be considered nothing but ashes by now, and I would definitely be their next target. What would be your first move if you knew your own family was plotting against you? I knew I had to fight back, but how? I heard footsteps in my mother-in-law's room. I scrambled back into bed and pulled the blanket over my head. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it pounding in my chest. The door to my room creaked open, and a shadow peeked in for a few seconds before closing it again. I don't know how they were looking at me, but one thing was clear. They saw me as a problem, and problems needed to be eliminated. In that exact moment, I knew my life was about to change completely. I couldn't be the nice girl anymore. I couldn't just take it. A single moment of weakness could mean losing everything. In the silence, I clenched my fists and made a promise. Chloe, from now on, you have to live differently. Not just to save your father, but to save yourself. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes. My head was heavy from the sleepless night. After hearing their secret confession, a ray of sunlight streamed through a crack in the wooden shutters, making the dust in the air sparkle like tiny dancers. I got up and took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down again. You have to act. You have to play the part of the naive, fragile daughter-in-law who knows nothing. That's the only way they'll get careless. When I came down to the kitchen, my mother-in-law was already there. Her hair was in a perfect bun, and her face was as calm as if she hadn't had that horrible conversation the night before. When she saw me, she managed a small smile. You look a little better today, daughter-in-law. I bowed my head and answered quietly, yes, I feel better, ma'am. Just as I was about to turn away, she stopped me. There's a lot to do today, too. So go and greet the guests. If a woman cries all day, people will make fun of her and call her weak. I bit my lip until it almost bled, but I still answered in a soft voice, yes, I understand, ma'am. I remembered an old saying, the soft can overcome the hard. To beat wicked people, sometimes you have to be soft, or at least pretend to be, so they let their guard down. At noon, I started watching every single look. When there was a lull in the visitors, I quietly went out to the garden. The midday sun shone through the hazy incense smoke. Everyone who came and went looked at me with pity. Poor girl, what terrible luck. A newlywed and already in mourning. But no one knew my pain was so much deeper than that. While I tried to keep an exhausted look on my face, I was fighting to hide the tension coursing through my veins. I watched my mother-in-law making phone calls with a calculating expression, Jake looking at his phone more than the guests, and Father Ian, who would pop up out of nowhere and only glance at the donation box. I memorized every one of their movements. Their quick glances, their casual comments, everything was a clue. Suddenly, I realized something. My mother-in-law, Jake, and Father Ian were all too calm. Way too calm for a fatal car accident, for such a somber funeral, and especially for the death of the man who paid their bills. This calmness was proof that everything was a lie. In the afternoon, playing my part as the grieving daughter, I went to the company. I'd like to get some of his things to keep as mementos. My mother-in-law looked at me with the suspicion of a woman who'd been in business for decades. "You're thinking about papers now? Just focus on the funeral." I bowed my head and said in a broken voice, "Yes, it's just, I want to keep something of my father's, ma'am." She stared at me for a long time, then sighed. "Fine, but come back quickly." As I turned to leave, I saw her expression relax. She probably thought I was still naive. When I got to the company, everyone was surprised to see me. They bowed their heads in greeting, their eyes filled with sympathy. I just gave a slight nod and tried to keep the sad expression my role demanded, but really, I was there for a completely different reason. I went straight to my father's office. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of wood hit me and tightened my chest. The chair he always sat in was in its place, and the papers were so organized it looked like he had just been working there the day before. I silently promised, "Dad, I will bring the truth back to this office." Sebastian followed me in and closed the door. In a quiet voice, he said, "Mrs. Lewis, I brought a USB drive. Maybe we can recover some of the deleted files." I nodded. We both started digging through the data on my father's computer. A lot of files had been deleted, but luckily, not all of them. Sebastian quietly exclaimed, "Mrs. Lewis, look at this. These are the manipulated contracts. This signature is Jake's." My hands were shaking. He opened another file. Sebastian examined it and said, "These are the records of transfers to Father Ian's parish. The amounts are more than 5 times higher than a normal donation." My blood ran cold. Sebastian whispered with a trembling voice, "Mrs. Lewis, this is undeniable proof." I took a deep breath. Save everything. Every single file. I looked around the office. For years, my father had protected the company from this very spot. Now, it was up to me to finish the job in his name. The trip back to my in-laws' house felt like walking into a lion's den. After a long day, I returned. As I walked in, I saw Jake watching TV with his feet up on the table. He looked at me like he was the king of the castle. "And where have you been all day? You didn't even help my mother greet the guests." I swallowed my anger. "I'm sorry, I was at the company to get a few of Dad's documents." My mother-in-law, coming out of her room, heard me and raised an eyebrow. "What kind of documents? What good are those? Take care of the funeral and stop with the nonsense, daughter-in-law." I bowed my head. "Yes, it's just that I miss Dad so much." As I said that, I tried to make my eyes fill with tears. I saw my mother-in-law's gaze soften just a little. It's easy to intimidate the nice ones, she must have thought. But I was different now. I was acting, and they were buying it completely. That night, lying in bed, I could clearly hear my own heartbeat. Heavy, fast, but stronger than ever before. From the moment I left the cemetery the other night, I knew I had entered a war I couldn't back out of. And the daughter-in-law of this house, the good woman they had always dismissed, that very woman was going to make them pay for their sins. On a gray morning, the wind was blowing cold. A thin trail of smoke still rose from the burnt-out incense on the altar. I stood in front of the mirror, fixing my messy hair, trying to look like a daughter completely devastated by the loss of her father. But deep in my eyes, there was a coldness and a steely determination that no one could see. Today was the day I had to go to the company, right at the time when my husband's family was holding a secret meeting to seize power. I knew they saw me as a problem to be thrown away, just like they had talked about the night before, if I let my guard down for even a second. I put on a simple black suit and covered my head with a veil, following the mourning customs. When I came into the living room, my mother-in-law sized me up and said, "Daughter-in-law, a lot of people will be at the company today, so behave yourself. We are in mourning. Be careful not to start any gossip." I nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Inside, I thought, if following protocol keeps me alive, I can put up with it a little longer. At the company, the conspiratorial atmosphere was as thick as fog. The moment I walked into the lobby, several pairs of eyes locked on me. The employees who were loyal to my father came over. "Mrs. Lewis, are you okay? We are so sorry about your father." I gave a small nod but didn't cry, even though I felt a lump in my throat. "Thank you for your sympathy." My father wouldn't want to see me weak either. I went straight to the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and Jake's cold voice drifted out. "Even though the funeral isn't over, the work can't stop. As a family member, I'll be temporarily taking over management." I paused in front of the door for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The squeak of a chair broke the silence, and several people jumped. Jake was stunned to see me for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Chloe, what are you doing here? You're in mourning." I looked at him. My eyes showed sadness, but the sword in my heart was sharp. "Please, continue. I want to hear what's so urgent for all of you when it hasn't even been a week since my father's death." The room fell silent. No one had expected me to show up right then. My mother-in-law's face, sitting at the back, went a little pale, but she tried to raise her voice. "Daughter-in-law, this is a company matter. This is no place for you to interfere." I walked slowly toward the long table and placed my hands on its cold surface. My voice was quiet, but every word was clear. "Yes, ma'am, but my father left a will, and until it's read, no one can just unilaterally take over management, right?" Several directors exchanged looks. They knew I was right. Jake gritted his teeth. "Chloe, don't make a scene." I gave a tiny smile. It was the first time I had smiled after days of nonstop crying. "I'm not making a scene. I'm just reminding you of the law. Besides, there are too many suspicious things about my father's accident." Right at that moment, the cell phone in my pocket vibrated. It was a text from Sebastian. "The police are in the lobby. They said they got an anonymous tip." I didn't know who made the call, but it was clear this was the turning point I needed. I looked up and said gently, "It seems the police are here. I'm not sure if it's about some financial issue with the company or if it has to do with the clergyman who brought us my father's ashes." Father Ian's face, sitting in the back, turned as white as a sheet. He nervously adjusted his sleeve, and sweat stains appeared on his clothes. The room instantly filled with a suffocating tension. Jake jumped up. "What are you implying, Chloe?" I looked him straight in the eyes and said slowly but firmly, "I'm not implying anything. As everyone knows, the accident happened at night near the ravine. How is it possible that in less than a day, the ashes appeared and the cremation certificate was perfectly ready?" My mother-in-law gripped the edge of the table, her lips trembling. "Watch your mouth, Chloe." I paused and then continued. "Yes, I also hope everything is cleared up transparently, whether there have been any unusual money transfers within the company related to the church or the assignment of contracts." Before I could finish, Father Ian shot up and said nervously, I have an urgent matter. I have to go." No one said anything, but everyone knew. A guilty conscience betrays itself. Jake quickly moved toward me and grabbed my wrist tightly. "Stop it. Don't ruin my plans." I looked at him with empty eyes. "Ruin them? I'm just helping everyone see things more clearly." At that moment, an employee opened the door and peeked in. "Excuse me, the police are asking for some financial records downstairs." In that instant, I clearly saw the panic in my in-laws' eyes and knew that I had won the first battle in this war. After the tense meeting at the company, the atmosphere in my in-laws' house was like the calm before a storm. On the surface, everything was quiet, but underneath, the currents were raging. I could feel that they had started to suspect me. They had realized I was no longer the naive and fragile daughter-in-law I used to be. That night, while I was putting away my mourning clothes in my room, Jake came in. He slammed the door with a bang that made me jump. "Chloe, what the hell were you doing at the company today?" His voice was a low growl. I looked up and put on my most innocent expression. "I was just asking about things that worried me. My father died." Jake cut me off with a dark look. "Cut the crap. This is way too big for you to be getting involved in." In that moment, I realized there was no love left in his eyes, only threat, annoyance, and fear. He was afraid I knew too much. Calmly, I said to him, "I just want justice for my father." Jake's face twisted. I couldn't tell if it was from anger or worry. He came closer and said in a quiet but sharp voice, "Chloe, don't make me do something I'll regret." His warning sent a chill down my spine. I stared at the floor so he wouldn't see me shaking. All right. Jake turned and left, slamming the door so hard the whole room seemed to shake with his anger. That night, when I went down to the kitchen for some water, I heard my mother-in-law's voice in the living room. I hid behind a pillar, my heart pounding. There were 3 people in the room: my mother-in-law, Jake, and Mr. Olson, the business partner my father had been suspicious of. Mr. Olson's voice was rough. "This Chloe girl is starting to become a problem. She's found out too much, too fast." My mother-in-law sighed. "I thought she was obedient, but I didn't realize she was so stubborn. After the way she challenged us at the company today, it's clear she's dangerous." Jake growled. "Mom, she has some kind of USB drive. She must have searched my father's computer." My heart leaped. They knew. They knew I had what terrified them. Mr. Olson scoffed. "There's no other choice now. Leaving this girl alive is a risk for all of us." I felt my legs go weak. My mother-in-law asked calmly, "What do you mean by that?" Mr. Olson answered firmly, "We have to get rid of her." I had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. The daughter-in-law they once called delightful had become a thorn that needed to be pulled. Jake didn't object. He said something that froze my heart. "I'll take care of it as long as you don't get involved, Mom." My mother-in-law nodded thoughtfully. "But it has to be a clean job so no one suspects anything." Mr. Olson's voice came through again. "I have someone I trust, a guy who specializes in these kinds of jobs and leaves no trace. They call him the Shadow Dot." I recognized the name, a thug who had been in the news once. If they got him involved, I wouldn't have a chance. Around midnight, I heard the front door open quietly. I pulled the curtain aside just a bit and looked down. Mr. Olson was getting into his car while my mother-in-law and Jake said goodbye. I heard Jake ask quietly, "So, is everything set for tomorrow evening?" Mr. Olson nodded. "Yes, tell the girl she needs to bring an offering to the church. The shadow will cut her off halfway there." My legs gave out, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Their plan was to lure me out of the house alone so they could kidnap and eliminate me. I was shaking so hard I felt sick, but I gritted my teeth. "Don't fall apart. You have to survive to save your father and expose these people." As soon as I was back in my room, I got a text from Sebastian. "Mrs. Lewis, the director says that since this afternoon, the camera angle near the warehouse has been moved. Someone left a mark. Be careful. It wasn't just me who was in danger. My father was being watched too." I quickly replied, "Watch my father's location carefully. If anything happens, tell me immediately." I turned off my phone. I was exhausted, but my mind was more determined than ever. I was no longer the daughter-in-law who only knew how to endure. If I wanted to live, I had to be smarter, faster, and maybe even a little more ruthless than they were. I told myself, to beat the enemy on the outside, you first have to conquer the enemy on the inside. I couldn't sleep that night. The whole house felt silent, but it was thick with the smell of conspiracy, crime, and a disgusting betrayal. And I knew it. Tomorrow, they would make their move, and it would be the biggest test of my life. Late the next afternoon, the sky was a lead gray and threatened rain. The wind whistled sadly through the trees lining the street. A cold that felt unusual for early winter made me shiver. But what really chilled me to the bone was the plan my husband's family had made the night before, to lure me out of the house and hand me over to that man, the Shadow. I knew they were going to act today, but I also knew I had to face it. If I didn't walk into their trap, they would just find another way to get to me, maybe an even worse one. Around 7 in the evening, while I was cleaning the kitchen, Jake came downstairs, sighed with a worried look on his face, and said, "Chloe, could you go to Father Ian's church tonight and bring him an offering for your father? I have an urgent meeting." When I heard that, my heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what Mr. Olson had ordered the night before. I looked up and tried to seem naive. Why do I have to go alone? It's already dark. Jake frowned impatiently. "You're a grown woman. I told you I have work. If you don't want to help, then don't." My mother-in-law, who was in the living room, chimed in. Her voice was as calm as a still pond. Chloe, it'll only take a minute. The church is right around the corner. A good wife should take care of household matters. I looked at her like she was a complete stranger, but I still lowered my head and answered quietly, yes, I'll go. As I walked out the door, I saw a small smile appear on my mother-in-law's lips. It was quick, but as cold as ice. I knew that in their minds, I was a person who wouldn't be coming back tonight. I walked to the street corner. As soon as I was out of their sight, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Sebastian. They're making their move. Activate my tracker and get my father to safety. If I don't answer my phone, call the police immediately. Before I could put my phone away, a small van screeched to a stop next to me. Before I could even react, a black cloth was thrown over my head and someone grabbed me from behind by the neck. I was roughly shoved into the vehicle and the door slammed shut with a loud bang. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and gasoline. I tried to scream, but they clamped a hand over my mouth. A rough male voice said, "Hold still. If you scream again, I'll tie you up." The shadow. It was the voice I had heard on the news. The van sped down an empty street. I was thrown back and forth and felt like my limbs would break. But through all the chaos, I clearly heard the man in the passenger seat say, "Mr. Olson said it has to be a clean job tonight so this brat never opens her mouth again." I bit my lips until they bled. My heart was racing. Everything was dark, as if hundreds of invisible hands were dragging me into a deep abyss. About 30 minutes later, the van stopped. I was dragged out. The smell of insects, damp earth, and old fabric hit me. We were in an abandoned warehouse. When they finally took the cloth off my head, I saw grim faces under a weak, gloomy yellow light. I wasn't trembling with fear, but with rage. Rage that they dared to treat my life like it was nothing. The shadow pushed me onto a wooden chair. "Smart girl, you know too much." I didn't answer. I just stared him straight in the eyes without flinching. He scoffed. "So brave. But that won't help you. Today is your last day." The warehouse door opened, and my mother-in-law walked in. Behind her was Father Ian in his dark robes. His face was pale, but his eyes were cunning. And finally, Jake walked in. The three people who were once my family were now showing their true faces in the darkness. My mother-in-law crossed her arms and stood in front of me. "Daughter-in-law, you have disappointed me greatly." I laughed. "No, it's more like I've become an inconvenience for you." Father Ian said nervously, "This girl knows about the ashes. She knows too much. If we don't get rid of her, everything will fall apart." I turned my head to him. A man of God who swaps ashes and covers up a murder. How can you even face yourself when you pray? He took a step back, his face pale. My mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table. "Stop this nonsense. You've gotten insolent since you found out the truth. You thought you were so smart, but you're nothing but trash that my son and I picked up." Jake came closer and grabbed my chin tightly. "Chloe, I warned you. You should have just kept quiet." I looked at him with empty eyes. "You were only ever obedient to your mother. To me, you've been nothing but a coward." Right at the moment Jake raised his hand to hit me, I pressed a small button I had hidden under my belt. The tracker Sebastian had installed was activated. In the distance, we heard the sound of an engine getting closer at high speed. Then footsteps, shouts. The warehouse door was kicked open, and the bright lights of flashlights blinded us. A police officer's voice boomed, "Everyone freeze. You are under arrest for kidnapping." The shadow jumped up, but was thrown to the ground before he could get away. Father Ian put his hands on his head and screamed, I only. My mother-in-law was so pale she could barely stand. Jake was taken down so fast he couldn't even say a word. The warehouse descended into chaos, and all their secrets came pouring out right there. Cell phones, ledgers, transaction records, everything fell into the hands of the police within minutes. I sat there, still tied up, but my tears weren't from fear. They were from relief. I had survived. I had escaped, and in the end, they had handed the evidence over to the police themselves. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Dad, I did it." I stayed sitting motionless on the rotten wooden chair. The rope around my wrists was cutting into my skin, leaving bloody marks. But as the warehouse door was kicked open, the flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, and the sound of police boots stormed in, I felt like I was being pulled out of the darkest pit of my life. The death I thought was just moments away vanished like a nightmare being torn apart. The shadow was thrown to the cement floor in a split second. He screamed, I didn't do anything. Nothing. But the police didn't give him a chance to say another word. 2 burly officers pinned him down, twisting his arms behind his back. Jake stood frozen, his face pale. Drops of sweat beaded on his forehead. He opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning right up until the cold handcuffs snapped around his wrists. My mother-in-law backed away, clinging to the edge of a table with trembling hands. I had never seen her so completely undone. She just stammered, no, it wasn't me. I only. But her excuses were drowned out by the voice of an officer reading her rights. Father Ian nearly collapsed from shaking. His dark robes looked ridiculous in this scene. He clutched his rosary and mumbled senseless prayers. My God, I only helped. They forced me. The police immediately took his phone and a folder of documents from the cloth bag he was carrying. An officer quickly looked through some papers and then looked up with a sharp gaze. There's a bookkeeping log in here, too. Transfers from the accounts of Mr. Olson, Brenda Harrison, and Jake Williams. How do you explain this money? Father Ian's face turned to wax. He collapsed onto the warehouse floor. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. I only received donations. A policeman said coolly, there are donations of hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. And what about the fake ashes? It's all written down in this book. When I heard that, a shiver went through me. He had written everything down. Every time he took money, every time he did a dirty job. Someone was watching. An officer came over and carefully untied my ropes. Mrs. Lewis, are you hurt? I shook my head, even though my legs were still trembling. Sebastian came running in from outside. His face was pale with worry. Chloe, are you okay? Did they do anything to you? When I saw Sebastian's red eyes, I felt my heart soften. When I was on the verge of death, he was the only person I had trusted. I gasped, thanks to you. I'm here because of you. Sebastian bit his lip and clenched his fists. We also have to thank Lucas. He saw a suspicious man near where the director is hiding and called me right away. I had a bad feeling and saw your tracker activate, and luckily, the police were close by. When I heard that, I felt like I had been reborn. An officer led me out of the warehouse. The night wind hit my face, cold and sharp, but it helped clear my head. I turned around. The 3 people who once called me daughter-in-law were in handcuffs, their heads bowed. One was crying, one was shaking with fear, and one was in a panic, but none of their faces made me feel any pity. This was the price they had to pay. I was taken to the police station to give a statement. I told them everything, starting from when I got the text from my father, to the strange meeting at the company, to the kidnapping plan that night. When I was done, the policeman sitting across from me nodded. Mrs. Lewis, your statement matches the evidence we've just collected. Prepare yourself, because this isn't a simple kidnapping case. It's a possible conspiracy for organized murder. I bit my lip. I knew it. I had seen the cruelty in their eyes, the look of people who were past the point of no return. When I left the interrogation room, Lucas was waiting for me in the hallway. This middle-aged man, who had worked for my father for over 20 years, had tears in his eyes when he saw me. Mrs. Lewis, I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I shook my head and took his hand. You saved me, Mr. Lucas. I'll never forget that. In the courtyard of the station, a strong wind was blowing. I looked up at the dark sky. I had never felt so strong. My body was exhausted, and my legs were still shaking. But I thought of my father, of the pain he had endured, and of the moment he would step back into the light and reveal the whole truth. I had survived the night, but tomorrow was the day justice would start to be on our side. A new, brutal, but hopeful chapter was waiting for me. The next morning, Sebastian and I went to police headquarters to finish our statements. When I walked in, I saw a person sitting with their back to me. His gray hair and familiar build made my heart skip a beat. When that person stood up and turned around, I saw it was my father. With a lump in my throat, I could barely get out the word, Dad. My father smiled, but his eyes were red. He opened his arms, and I hugged him like a child seeing her father again after a long time. His clothes still smelled like disinfectant and the dirt from his days on the run. All of it hurt me and made me sad. He patted my back and said, "Sweetheart, I'm okay. You did so well, Chloe." I looked at his worn-out face. His eyes no longer held the bitterness of the past few days, but the determination and strength of a man ready to reclaim his honor. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Today, I'm going to tell them everything." I nodded. Beside us, Sebastian, also moved, greeted my father with a shaky voice. My father smiled back at him like he was his own son. We were led into an interrogation room. On the table, the cell phones and documents belonging to Father Ian, my mother-in-law, and Jake lay in sealed evidence bags. The atmosphere was heavy but serious. An inspector said, "Mr. Michael Lewis, we've reviewed Mrs. Lewis's statement and all the evidence. To complete the file, we need you to tell us everything from the beginning." My father took a deep breath and began to speak. About a week before the accident, I noticed something strange with some contracts. Large sums of money had been withdrawn without any justification. I started to investigate secretly. My heart jumped. My father continued, "I discovered forged signatures on 2 important contracts. The signature was Jake's." The room fell silent for a few seconds. I felt my heart tighten, but I swallowed my tears. It was time to hear the truth, not to be weak. My father went on, "I called Jake in for a private conversation. He denied it at first, but then I saw the fear in his eyes. Before I could take any action, he ran to his mother and told her everything. Brenda Harrison immediately met with Mr. Olson, and that's where the conspiracy began." The inspector asked, "Are you certain they conspired to harm you?" My father nodded. "Yes, I overheard one of their calls. Mr. Olson said he would prepare the field, and Brenda said it had to be done cleanly. They also mentioned Father Ian. They needed a convincing accident and someone trustworthy to deliver the ashes." I pressed my hands together until my knuckles turned white. They had planned every single step perfectly to cover up their crime. My father slowly recounted the story, as if he were reliving the horror of his days on the run. My car was tampered with, and the driver was drugged. I noticed something was wrong and yelled at him to stop, but he was already unconscious. When the car crashed, I was thrown out through the door. It was a miracle. I lowered my head, and a tear fell onto the back of my hand. My father continued, "Locals from the woods saved me, but I knew they would search the area again. So I couldn't reveal my identity. I hid in the woods until night fell and found out that an urn had been delivered and my death had been declared. In that moment, I knew I had to be more careful than ever." The inspector asked, "Who informed you so you could contact your daughter?" My father looked at me and smiled slightly. "Thanks to the news of the funeral, I overheard a group of people talking about the time and that Chloe would be holding awake all night. I found an old phone in the hut and sent my daughter a message." I squeezed his hand tight. It had only been a few lines, but they had saved my life. The inspector took out a folder. "Mr. Lewis, on Father Ian's phone, we have all the evidence of the money transfers. There's also an audio recording of him accepting the job of getting fake ashes. And in Brenda Harrison's handbag, we found a copy of a contract for misappropriating assets." My father let out a sigh of relief, though it was mixed with pain. "Then they won't be able to deny it anymore." I looked at the documents and shuddered. The people who once smiled at me, who had eaten at the same table as me, who called me daughter-in-law, had tried to murder my father and get rid of me. The inspector concluded, "We will be pressing charges for multiple crimes. You and Mrs. Lewis will be placed under protection for now. This case involves high-ranking individuals, a fraudulent clergyman, and financial documents, so it will likely attract a lot of media attention." My father nodded, and I felt a weight lift from my chest. My father was alive, and I had survived, but there were still big challenges ahead of us. As we left the headquarters, my father put a hand on my shoulder. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry you had to go through something so difficult." I shook my head and hugged him. "Dad, if I didn't have you, I would truly be an orphan." My father smiled warmly, like the sun breaking through the clouds. From now on, no one will ever walk all over us again. Outside, the wind was blowing strong, rustling the leaves in the trees. I saw a patch of the sky clearing up and felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like seeing the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. The war was entering a new phase, one where my father, who they thought was dead, would face them with his head held high, and I would be by his side, his shield, just as he had been for me my whole life. My father returned to the company on a cloudy morning, but he had an exceptionally clear aura about him, as if even the sky knew it was an important day. When the police car dropped him off at the main entrance, dozens of employees were already waiting outside. Everyone was speechless when they saw him appear alive. Whispers spread through the lobby. The director is really alive, so the cremation was a lie. My God, who could be so cruel? I got out of the car first and helped him out. All eyes were on us. Looks of joy mixed with disbelief. No one could believe that the man whose urn had been brought home was standing right there. He was thinner than before, but just as commanding. My father greeted everyone with a slight wave of his hand. His voice was deep and calm. Thank you to everyone who worried about me these past few days. Today, I have returned to set things right. The lobby fell silent. The large conference room had already been prepared at the police's request. When we entered, I saw my mother-in-law, Jake, and Father Ian sitting on one side, guarded. They all had pale faces. The people who were once so arrogant and treated me like nothing now had their heads bowed, as if they could sense their end was near. Jake looked up when he saw my father. His eyes went wide, and then he quickly looked down again like a trapped animal. My mother-in-law was shaking so much she could barely stay on her feet, and Father Ian was just muttering senseless prayers with a lost look on his face. I sat down next to my father. I felt much stronger, but in a corner of my heart, the pain of betrayal was still a raw wound. When the official meeting started, a police inspector stood up. Today, we are here to reveal the truth about the accident of director Michael Lewis and the forgery of his ashes, and to present the evidence regarding the misappropriation of assets, the passing of contracts, and the conspiracy for organized murder. The atmosphere was as tense as a drawn bowstring, and every word seemed to echo from the ceiling. My father stood up and walked slowly to the front. He leaned his hands on the lectern and looked, one by one, at the employees who had been with him since the company was founded. I, Michael Lewis, never imagined the day would come when I would have to stand before you under these circumstances. He paused, as if a lump was forming in his throat. I saw his eyes get misty. I was the victim of an assassination attempt. It was a planned accident, and the most painful part is that the guilty parties were people I once trusted. The room filled with gasps of astonishment, and many people covered their mouths in disbelief. The inspector presented a folder of documents. This is the proof that Brenda Harrison, Jake's mother, conspired with Mr. Olson and Father Ian. To cover up the attempted murder of Director Lewis, they used an unidentified body to create fake ashes. An employee burst into tears. How could you do that to the director? My father turned and looked firmly at Jake. His eyes held no anger, only deep disappointment. Jake, I considered you a son, but your greed made you forget even the most basic principles of humanity. Jake lowered his head. I saw his shoulders shaking slightly, but I didn't know if it was from remorse or fear. My father continued, and you, Father Ian, who I believed to be a moral man, turned out to be a fraud who used the teachings of God to cover up his own sins. He turned to everyone and raised his voice. Will those who forged ashes to cover up a crime be judged according to the law? The inspector nodded affirmatively. All those involved have been placed under house arrest and will be investigated according to legal regulations. After stating the facts, my father took a thick envelope out of his briefcase. It was something I had seen in the safe at home before. He held it up. And now I would like to make my new directive public. The room filled with murmurs again. My father spoke every word with clarity. All of my voting rights, my inherited fortune, and my shares are transferred to my only daughter, Chloe Lewis. I froze. I didn't know my father had prepared all this before the assassination attempt. He continued, I am officially stripping Jake Williams and Brenda Harrison of all their rights and privileges in this company. As of today, they have no relationship whatsoever with this business. A sob came from my mother-in-law's side. She burst into tears with a broken voice. Mr. Lewis, I'm sorry, but please. My father shook his head. His gaze was sad but firm. Those who have done wrong must pay for it. Jake bit his lips until they bled. Father Ian closed his eyes as if there was no escape and sighed. All the employees stood up and applauded as one. It wasn't applause of joy, but applause because justice was finally being served. I looked at my father with a touched, heavy heart. I felt all the humiliation and pain that had built up in the last few days begin to fade a little. My father turned to me and said quietly, Sweetheart, from now on, you have to be strong, not just for me, but for yourself. My eyes filled with tears, and I nodded. He was right. From now on, I would live for myself. The meeting ended, but this was only the beginning of the case for those who had chosen the path of evil. And I was ready to make the most important decision of my life. The morning after the directive was announced, I woke up in my old room in my father's house, but the feeling was completely different. For the first time in weeks, I heard the chirping of birds in the branches outside, and the sun shining through the window cast a soft light on the thin curtains. The days of waking up with fear, worry, and tension were gone. Yet my heart was still heavy. Today, I had to do something I should have done a long time ago. I went back to the house I once considered my home, my in-laws' house, to pack my things and face Jake one last time. The old rusted iron gate, the wall covered in withered ivy, everything seemed foreign to me. As soon as I stepped into the courtyard, my mother-in-law came running out of the house. She was still in a dark blue house dress, and her face was pale from sleepless nights. She stood in my way and said, her eyes trying to bore into me, Chloe, listen to me. I stood there quietly and tilted my head slightly with the bare minimum of politeness. Yes, ma'am, what is it? She gasped, her voice trembling and pleading like never before. I was wrong. I know I was wrong, but this house loved you, and you loved me too. Don't be so cruel. I looked at her. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because my heart had already grown cold. What's broken can't be fixed. Spilled water can't be gathered up again. Never had a saying seemed so true to me as it did in that moment. I answered quietly, ma'am, I don't want to blame anyone. But if I stayed silent after what you did to my father and me, I would be betraying myself. She burst into tears and grabbed my hand. Give me a chance to make it right, Chloe. I don't want to lose you. I gently pulled my hand away. I haven't lost anything, and neither have you. We simply are no longer family. In that moment, Jake came out of the living room. He was wearing a crumpled, messy white shirt, like he hadn't slept in nights. His eyes were bloodshot, and he walked with an unsteady gait. When he saw me, he said with a trembling voice, Chloe, please, let's talk. I stood quietly. This was the moment I needed to hear to finally close this chapter. Jake came closer and stopped a few steps in front of me. His shoulders were slumped like someone who had lost all their strength. I'm sorry. Really, I'm sorry. I got carried away. I was afraid of my mother. I was afraid of Mr. Olson. I managed a small smile. It was the most cowardly excuse I had ever heard. Jake, you were afraid of other people, but you were never afraid of losing me. I was your wife, the person who stood by your side. I swallowed, feeling a lump in my throat. But when my father died, you were at a resort holding another woman's hand. While I was collapsing from pain, you were trying to kill my father to steal his inheritance. Jake burst into tears. It was the choked sobbing of a man who had lost everything. Chloe, I was blind. Really, I was wrong. Give me a chance to make it right. I shook my head. I wasn't angry or resentful. There was simply nothing left to save. Jake, during this entire marriage, I wasn't a real wife for a single day. I always lived in fear of being judged, of being ignored, of disagreeing with your mother. And you were never, not once, my safe place. I opened my handbag and took out the papers I had prepared that morning. These are the divorce papers. I've already signed them. You just have to sign. Jake took a step back. His eyes were filled with panic. No, don't do this. I can change. I promise you I'll love you. I'll leave my mother. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and opened them again. My voice was so calm it surprised me. Jake, you can wake someone who's sleeping, but you can't wake someone who's pretending to be asleep. The love that connected us, you buried it yourself. My mother-in-law collapsed, sobbing, on the floor. Chloe, I'm begging you. I'm truly sorry. I bent down and helped her up. My voice was very gentle, but every word was clear. Ma'am, do you regret this because you value me or because you're afraid of going to prison? My mother-in-law froze. I stood up and looked at them both, the two people who were once my family. I don't blame anyone anymore, but I have to leave here. I've decided to live my own life. Without giving them a chance to say anything else, I went into the room and gathered the few clothes that were mine. My in-laws had never allowed me to bring things from home, so I barely had any belongings there. As I walked out, Jake was still standing in the courtyard, watching me silently. I paused for a moment, then walked past him as if walking through a door that was closed forever. As I shut the gate behind me, I could hear Brenda collapse and Jake shouting my name. But it all just faded away, like the echo of a bad dream. I walked down the long road to catch a taxi to my dad's house, pulling my small suitcase behind me. Every step felt lighter, freer, like a huge weight that had been crushing me for years was finally gone. I told myself, Chloe, you did the right thing. Looking back, it was the only choice I had. Do you think I made the right decision? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. I had put an end to this hellish marriage, but I still had one last thing to do, end their crimes for good. That path was still waiting for me. After officially leaving my in-laws' house, I returned to my father's side. The house he had built in his youth felt strangely warm to me. The gentle scent of lotus tea, the sound of Lucas sweeping the courtyard, the footsteps of Sebastian coming and going to take care of my father, all of it gave me the feeling that this was where I belonged. But I knew it wasn't over yet. The guilty still had to face justice, and my father was going to personally make sure everything was cleared up. A few days later, the police scheduled an official confrontation. I went there with my father and Sebastian. The sky was overcast with dark, gathering clouds, as if predicting a long and difficult investigation. When we entered the room, I saw Jake with a pale face sitting next to his lawyer. My mother-in-law was haggard with messy hair. Father Ian was no longer in a robe, but in worn-out clothes. It was an image that made me think bitterly about fate. No one looked at me, and no one dared to look my father in the eye. My father went to his chair and sat down with the firm posture of someone who had been preparing for this moment for a long time. The inspector opened a file and said in a clear voice, "The confrontation between Mr. Michael Lewis and the accused begins." The room fell into a dead silence, where you could even hear the pages turning. The inspector read out, according to the statement of the accused, Jake Williams, I was only following my mother's instructions. My mother told me if my father-in-law discovered the embezzlement, I would have no future. Do you acknowledge this statement? Jake lowered his head and answered in a whisper, yes. My father looked at him. His gaze was calm but piercing. Jake, I loved you like a son. If you had wanted to leave the company, I would have gladly let you go. But you and your mother chose the path of trying to kill me to steal what wasn't yours. Jake didn't dare to look up. He just sobbed quietly, his hands trembling on the table. The inspector turned to my mother-in-law. According to the evidence we've collected, you actively contacted Mr. Olson to plan the accident. What do you have to say to that? My mother-in-law burst into tears, but she no longer had her old arrogance. I only did it for my son, Mr. Lewis. You always looked down on my son and me. I just wanted to secure a place for my son. I didn't know it would end like this. My father answered immediately. His voice sounded more sad than angry. Ma'am, I never looked down on you. That was all in your imagination. I simply didn't give power to anyone who didn't have the ability to handle it. That was my responsibility. My mother-in-law froze. It was a simple truth she had twisted for years with her resentment. The inspector continued, Father Ian, you received money from Brenda Harrison and Mr. Olson to create fake ashes. Do you admit that? Father Ian trembled and clasped his hands. I admit it. The inspector went on, and you received an additional payment for advising the family to speed up the funeral to eliminate any trace. He lowered his head. Yes, I was a fool. Money blinded me. When I heard that, I shuddered. Greed was sometimes more dangerous than a knife. My father sat with his back straight. His voice echoed clearly. I hope the law judges the guilty as they deserve. There should be no leniency because I was the victim, nor should their crimes be covered up because they were once my family. I looked at my father and suddenly burst into tears. This was my father, a man who had lived his whole life with integrity and kindness, and who, despite being on the brink of death, had not lost his dignity. Jake jumped up, his voice choked. Father-in-law, please give me a chance. I was wrong. I have no right to look at you. But please at least lessen my mother's punishment. I turned to look at him. In my eyes, there was no trace of affection left, only an exhausted sadness. Jake, when they locked me in that warehouse to kill me, did you think of me then, Jake? He froze, put his hands on his head, and slumped into his chair. The inspector finished his notes and declared the confrontation over. This case will now move to the indictment phase for attempted murder, kidnapping, misappropriation of assets, and conspiracy to cover up a crime. His words sounded like a bell tolling, confirming the total downfall of those who had sided with evil. My father stood up, turned to me, and said, Chloe, from now on, everything will be handled by the law. You don't need to worry anymore. I grabbed his hand. Dad, I just want you to be at peace. Let's live quietly, just the two of us. My father smiled kindly. Yes, sweetheart, we've made it through the storm. As we left the hall, I turned around one last time. Jake had his head down. My mother-in-law was sobbing, and Father Ian sat stunned, like he had lost his soul. This was the price they all had to pay. Outside, the sky began to clear, and a ray of sunshine lit up the hallway, as if opening a new path in my life. An old chapter was closed, and a new life was waiting for me. My father's case was resolved quickly, and in just over a month, the court delivered its verdict. The mastermind, Mr. Olson, received the maximum sentence. Father Ian was found guilty of fraud, forgery of documents, and covering up a crime. My mother-in-law and Jake were sentenced to prison for conspiracy to commit murder and kidnapping. When I heard the verdict in the courtroom, I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. I just felt that the heavy weight on my chest had finally been lifted. Some wounds never heal, but at least justice had sided with the innocent. My father, who sat by my side during the entire trial, kept a very calm expression. As we walked through the courthouse hallway, he took my hand warmly, just like he did when I was a child. Chloe, I don't hold a grudge against anyone anymore. Despite everything I went through, I still have you by my side, and that's enough. I leaned my head on his shoulder and felt my heart become lighter. A dark chapter of my life was closed, and I was on the brink of a different future. Afterward, my father's company regained its stability. My father stepped back from frontline management, placed the leadership in the hands of the board, and only took on an advisory role. With the shares he had transferred to me, I had decision-making power. But my father was clear, you don't have to do everything alone. Just live your life the way you want, with joy and in peace. I agreed with him. After everything that had happened, I had learned that no matter how hard this world is, if you keep a pure heart, if you know how to love others and yourself, no one can extinguish your inner light. On a sunny afternoon, I made dinner for my father for the first time after all the incidents. The kitchen filled with the aroma of lentil stew, baked fish, and vegetables we bought from the local market. My father ate slowly and looked at me every now and then with a tender smile. Maybe they didn't want you as a daughter-in-law, but as my daughter, I will give you all the love you were missing. I laughed, but I couldn't stop the tears. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. That night, I stood on the porch, looked up at the starry sky, and thought about everything that had happened. The marriage full of wounds, the fight against evil, and the journey to find myself again. And now I was where I should have been from the beginning, a woman who knows her own value, who knows where her boundaries are and what is truly important. Tomorrow, I would start over. Maybe I would open a small shop or learn something I had always wanted to but never dared to try. I didn't want a grand life. I just wanted a life that was truly peaceful. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, creating a rustling sound that sounded like a blessing from heaven. I closed my eyes and whispered, to no one in particular, perhaps to myself, Chloe, from now on, be truly happy. The chapter of an era was closed, and a new life had just begun. We've listened to this strong woman's story, together. I'm grateful to her for sharing her courage with us. So, what do you think? If you were in her place, could you make these difficult decisions? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I read each one and try to respond. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.